I've just telling John, I've been working on this issue for a little more than 3.5 years, and what we knew, and as was mentioned, I work at the Cincinnati USA Regional Chamber. We are one of the partners in a broad and diverse coalition that's come together around this issue. We've been working for really the last 3.5 years on this issue, and what we knew is that as you think about the big community conversations happening in our region, the big things we're trying to tackle, whether it's issues around reducing poverty or growing our population or increasing economic development and improving public health and sustainability, at each of those tables where there are people working to solve those problems, the issue of mobility and transportation comes up. And so we knew that in this work we had to do something to fix our transportation system, because it's the thing that unlocks so many other solutions to so many other persistent problems in our region. Anyone in here a bus rider? I know we talked a little about it. Perfect. This is what I always like to do before I dive in on what's on the ballot and what we're proposing to change. I'd like to give a little bit of a level set in terms of how things exist today, because for most folks, they're not aware of the situation. So, yeah.
Are we allowed to ask questions?
Absolutely.
What percentage of the population are bus riders?
Regionally, about 10% of the population commutes to work by bus. That's probably the best metric to use in terms of sort of when you're trying to get at a certain percentage. And note that that's regionally, not just Hamilton County. So the state of our public transit system today, what we know is that the system was designed in the late 1970s to be really a hub and spoke system. You live out in the suburbs, you work downtown, we know how to get you there from an 8 to 5 type of job. Things have changed since the late 1970s, just a few things. And what that means for our system is that, but we have not changed our system to keep up with that. So what that means is that we've got a community where less than 1 in 4 jobs are connected by a 90-minute public transit commute. That's my drive to Columbus one way. And so we know that access to jobs is incredibly challenging. We know that the system as it's designed is not meeting the needs of employers, employees, parents, families, churchgoers, or just sort of people who are recreating. And because of the way we fund this agency, currently SORTA is funded by a 0.3% earnings tax. We are the only system of its kind in the state, and one of the only that we've been able to find in the country where you have a municipal funding stream for what is a county-wide function, a county-wide service. They have an unsustainable budget. So looking out over the next 10 years, there's a $165 million budget deficit. So we're at a point now where we have a system that's not designed to work, have a system that isn't connecting people to the places they need to go, and if we do nothing, continues to get worse. At the same time, we're an old city, and we are a city of hills that have major infrastructure challenges. So whether they be big things, like anyone get here on the Western Hills Viaduct, regularly, it's not a fun experience. Anyone come from the east side of Columbia Parkway? Also not a fun experience. My wife was driving on in the rain last week and she took it for out. Whether it be those big things or whether it be small things like roads that have potholes in them, or intersections that need to be improved, or places where there are no sidewalks that we need to include sidewalks. There are major infrastructure needs in our community, and the cost to improve that infrastructure has gone up. This is 60% of the last 4 years. If you talk to Mayor Cranley, he'll tell you it's actually 100% since he took office. So the cost to improve our infrastructure is going up, while the backlog is growing. And so what we have in front of us is an opportunity, and that opportunity is spread across 2 elections, one of which we've already been successful on, to invest $130 million into our transportation system by raising the countywide sales tax by 0.8% and eliminating the 0.3% funding for transit. And I'll walk you through all of this. What you would do is you would take $100 million and invest it into our public transit system moving forward. And so that is a doubling of the local revenue stream for the Metro bus system, and is coupled with a large expansion of public transit. And then you also create a $30 million local fund for infrastructure to improve roads and bridges across Hamilton County. This will be the only fund of its type in the state of Ohio, and it'll be the only fund that will allow local communities to tap in on an annual basis to local funds without having to go through state and federal processes to compete for dollars. So the first of those elections was issue 22. If you live in the city of Cincinnati, you saw this on your ballot, and if you live in the city of Cincinnati, there's a pretty good chance that you voted for this, because 76% of voters supported issue 22, which was the contingent repeal of the earnings tax as long as we pass a sales tax in 2020. Anyone who's worked in campaigns and politics, if you have a map like this that shows every single precinct going in your direction, you're probably going to want to frame it because it almost never happens. But on election night, there was one precinct where we were tied, and I was like losing my mind, right? It was like 16-16 in Price Hill, and as they counted additional votes, the provisional vote ballots, we were able to prevail by 2 votes in that precinct, and we won every single precinct. So strong support from the city of Cincinnati to take the first step to investing in our transportation system. The next step is this countywide sales tax. We are now issue 7. We just, as of Friday, got our issue number, issue 7. And what you see here is the ballot language that voters will see when they walk into the booth. And so a couple things I will point out. 0.8% sales tax, as we talked about. It's a 25-year levy. This is not because we believe that the need disappears in 25 years, but we wanted to make sure we could do 2 things. One was achieve all of our policy objectives in this by fixing and growing our public transit system and making a significant impact on our infrastructure system, while also being clear that voters will have the opportunity to revisit and discuss this issue before renewal. So 25-year levy put on by the Southwest Ohio Regional Transit Authority. First thing here, none of the proceeds go to the Cincinnati streetcar. This is a levy that is supporting growing our bus system and investing in roads and bridges. So very clear to voters that piece is there. 25% of the funds, as I mentioned, create this new infrastructure fund. In year 1, that's $30 million. The sales tax is projected to grow at about 2%. And 75% of the funds for the operations of the public transit system. So what does this look like for the public transit system? There are 3 key things that these new dollars will be spent on. The first is increasing frequency on our bus route. There are plenty of places in this community where a bus runs every 45 minutes or an hour or even longer. And on the weekends, it might run either not at all or even worse than that. And so what this will do is drive significant new investment into frequency on the existing routes we have. The second is that these buses start at a certain time in the morning and they end at a certain time at night. We'll be expanding the hours of those routes. So they run earlier in the morning, later at night, including having 24-hour service on 6 major corridors. The last piece of this is that we're going to be moving to a crosstown system. We're going to add new crosstown routes, and I'll show you those maps here. And all of that leads to faster trip time. So the time you spend getting from where you live or where you work to the place you want to go is diminished. So that, as of right now, we've got that 1 in 4 folks can't get to a job in 90 minutes. We're going to drastically improve that number. This it breaks every rule of PowerPoint by giving too much text, but you can really see the numbers here. 26 more routes get more frequent service. 18 routes have longer hours. 8 new routes, which I'll talk about. 8 routes have alignments changed so that where they might go really far out today, they might cut off and divert to go a different direction. We can talk a little bit about that. 6 routes, as I mentioned, with 24-hour service. Service every 20 minutes or better on major routes every day. That's huge. We have maybe 4 routes on our system right now that have that. To have every route, to have every major route with 20 minutes or better every day is incredible. Crosstown service, 30 minutes or better every day. Improved weekend service. All of this comes with corresponding improvements to the paratransit service, Metro Access, that serves seniors and people with disabilities who can't use the regular bus service. Additional new transit centers and park and rides. The opportunity for bus rapid transit, which is a real driver of economic development to move through major corridors in our region. And then demand response service, which is really a technology conversation about Uber and Lyft-like service in places where that makes sense. And then also diversifying the fleet of vehicles so that, where we need a 40-foot big bus, like the ones you're used to seeing that pass right out here in front of us, great, but where we might need a 25 or 30-foot bus because the service is smaller, we have a number of vehicles to accommodate the types of routes we're going to have. So visually, yeah.
What about new technology? 25 years from now, I would hope that we were not still running around with 45 passenger buses or whatever our bus sizes are.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So this is the plan that SORTA has developed to implement over the next 4 to 5 years. It's one they'll operate and they'll tweak and they'll change as technology changes. This demand response service that I mentioned, a lot of cities are moving to that, where it's as opposed to one fixed route vehicle If you pull out your phone and say, I'm within a zone, it'll deviate to where I am, pick me up, and then it'll deviate to another person and pick them up. But from a longer term perspective, by having a properly resourced transit authority, they'll have the ability to be on the front end of the technology conversation to say what is next and what works for our system. Today, the vast majority of that is a 30 or a 40-foot bus in corridors where it makes sense. In the future, it might be something completely different. Their ability to adapt to that is null without being properly resourced to transition to whatever is next. But today, we know that it is a properly resourced bus public transit system.
Yeah, but it's not really. I mean, it's not adequately funded to do the things that need to be done. So
Currently, it's not.
No, this will not fund it adequately. Will there be sufficient, is there a possibility of going back to the earnings tax?
Help me understand why you think it won't sufficiently fund the system.
Because I've been a transportation planner for years, and because I have a sense of what this does and how it works, and it's not going to get you the system that you need to adequately serve this community in the future.
I respectfully disagree, as do the
I don't
transportation
doubt it.
planners who have been working on
Yeah.
this at SORTA for the last 5 or 6 years. And I think there's certainly a question of how could you layer additional onto this? But I think going from what we have, which is a system of last resort for our community, and frankly, it's not even a last resort for a lot of folks, to a system that does connect across town, does provide high quality service 7 days a week.
We're going to go from a system of last resort to a system of second or third resort, but it's not going to be, it will not be funded adequately to provide the transportation that's going to change the way that the community moves, I don't believe. So that, and
I
that's
think we've
why.
got a fundamental disagreement there, but I'd be happy to walk through the
that's-
math to show folks what that
That's
looks
not,
like.
but assuming there is a need for more money in the future, it is still possible to go back to the earnings tax if there is a political will. And
If there's a political will,
that's not shut out.
the city of Cincinnati at any time can propose a change to the charter that includes an earnings tax increase. The city voters would have to approve it. I think that our community's success rate around investing in transportation thus far, we're about to change that by having the first successful levy on this issue in the last 40 years. I would question whether the city would do that, but yes, they are well within their ability to do that. Sorry.
Now, this would be a long-term question, kind of tagging along yours. What are the plans for having sustainable transportation options?
Yeah, it's a great question. We've actually been spending a lot of time with the folks at Duke and others and SORTA to talk about transitioning the fleet away from internal combustion engines, partly because manufacturers are making fewer vehicles like that. But there's an interest in both electric as well as natural gas vehicles moving forward. I think with there's some real upside on the electric side, and I think there's going to be there will be some movement in this direction. Currently, the fleet of vehicles that SORTA is operating, a large chunk of them are past their useful life, so more than 12 years old. Those are the least efficient vehicles out on the road. Every new vehicle they buy makes their fleet more efficient, but there's also an interest in transitioning away from a diesel fuel system to a system that's either electric or CNG or a hybrid of both.
How much is in the budget that will provide for the replenishment, renewal, getting the right vehicles in terms of energy size? How much is being allotted to that portion?
Yeah, so
Equipment acquisition.
it's a good question. A large chunk early on, and I don't have the dollar amount specifically, but what SORTA has done over the years is as they've gotten state or federal grants to replace vehicles, they'll replace as many as they can. So one year they may replace 16 vehicles, the next year they may replace 2, the year after that they might be able to replace 20. And so what they'll do is they'll start smoothing that line so that every year they're taking whatever is their last 12-year useful life and recycling it out. So early on they're going to do some catch-up, right, of cycling out a lot of these old buses. I don't know the exact number, but
Is money in this budget for that?
yes, there is significant money in this budget for
In addition,
capital.
we get grants in addition.
Correct.
to this.
Correct. Then what this will do is make us more successful to leverage those grants.
Have to wait using energy.
Correct. Correct. And
That's
so,
sort of the question.
so we've been organizing at the chamber. We've been organizing a conversation between Duke, the city of Cincinnati and their environment sustainability offices, SORTA and OKI, which is our regional planning organization, all of whom work in the EV space, to start thinking about how do you help SORTA transition in that direction. Yes.
I'm interested in